afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us for the CivicSpark New Project Partner Orientation. My name is Kif Scheuer. I'm a program director here at the Local Government Commission, who is the host of the CivicSpark program. I want to thank you all for taking time out of, I'm sure, your busy days to join us today. This orientation will provide an overview of our background and structure, an introduction to CivicSpark, and AmeriCorps and the policies that are involved with that. We'll then discuss the three elements of CivicSpark through the core activities that we do: capacity building, fellow development, and volunteer engagement. We'll talk a little bit about mutual roles and responsibilities, and then some next steps. I'll take some breaks at various points for questions and also take questions at the end. Also, you feel free to use the chat or Q&A function to send me a note in real time, and I'll try and pause and answer your questions as they come up. I will also provide the slides after this session, and we are recording this, so if you need to listen to it or share it with a colleague, you can do that. There will be a program guide coming. Generally, we've provided a handbook for site supervisors. We're combining that into one overall participant guide for fellows and supervisors with relevant appendices. That is in development. We'll be getting it to you before September 10th for sure, hopefully a little bit even before that. So let's get started. I'm going to provide some context through an overview of the background and structure of CivicSpark. So the first thing I want to say is, why is this important to participate in? You've talked to us, you've been interviewing candidates, you've applied to the program. It's really important to provide this kind of first-person orientation of the program to set that context for the program foundation and the boundaries we operate in, to highlight the links between our mission, our activities, and our implementation so you understand why we do what we do. We want you to also build that understanding of our core activities, how we have to operate in the world, and how those pieces fit together so that when fellows are asking for something or we're asking for something, or you understand the context for that. Ideally, we're trying to identify each of our key roles so that we can be as effective as possible in supporting you, have strong communication throughout the year. So the first thing I'll touch on is our mission as a program, as a fellowship program. So we're a Governor's Initiative AmeriCorps program that is broadly dedicated to building capacity for local governments. Our vision is of a California that's resilient, equitable, and vibrant for our communities, where our local governments and leaders are empowered and equipped to serve the needs of all community members. I think that's a vision we all can get behind. We do this through three things. Through national service, through AmeriCorps, we contribute to this vision by building local public sector capacity to address entrenched and emerging issues, to serve as a social purpose career accelerator for future leaders, and to foster some lasting, authentic community engagement. This mission both encapsulates our intent as a program and our structure, and as we go forward, we'll highlight this linkage. Many of you are familiar with us at the Local Government Commission, but I think it's worth just mentioning that we're the manager of CivicSpark, that CivicSpark falls within the larger mission of the Local Government Commission, a nonprofit with over 35 years of experience championing leadership at the local level. We're the program manager. We provide the infrastructure. We also do this program in partnership with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research and several other state agencies, but the OPR is our kind of liaison and our bridge. They also help link local governments to resources and tools, and also serve as an outlet for results from CivicSpark to help get the word out more broadly. We are supported and funded by the Corporation for National and Community Service through California Volunteers, which is the state commission for volunteerism and service in California. As a program, we're actually three programs. We started out in 2014 with 50 fellows focused on climate as an issue. In 2016, during the drought, we added a track to focus on water specifically with 20 more fellows. And then in 2018, as OPR in particular and the Governor's Office was seeing the success we were having tackling a variety of environmental issues, they asked us to look at adding some non-environmental, what we call opportunity access issues, affordable housing, rural broadband, mobility issues. And we did that in 2018. You don't see water on here because we made an effort to consolidate into one program last year, which was not successful, but in the process we let go of one of our grants. We were able to hold on to the number of spots, but we decided to fold it into a larger resiliency umbrella that we hope eventually will come to represent the whole program. And much of our messaging and structure is around a larger resiliency framework, but we are functionally still operating as 3 programs with 3 grants. And so each of your projects falls into one of these 3 tracks and have a slightly different lens from which they look through. However, a lot of the measures, instruments, and approaches are consistent across all 3 tracks. From the beginning, we've tried to provide a resource for as much of California as possible. This means we try to accept partner applications from across the state. Generally, we've placed 90 fellows in rough regions, which are cohorts of about 10 to 20 fellows that have tended to cluster around the more dense population centers, with some more limited placements further out. In this map, you can see some of the locations of the communities we've helped to support this past year. Next year, this coming year, the one you're part of, some will be the same, some will be different. Regional cohorts might be larger in some regions and smaller in others. We've set the program up to try and be responsive to community need while also being able to support our fellows as a program and through our staffing. I wanted to highlight for you all, and maybe you've seen this on our website, some of what we've accomplished. Not to toot our own horn, though I'm certainly happy with all the work that we've done, but to give you a sense that we see this as a very effective program. So this is only through our first 4 years. Our current class of 84 fellows is graduating. Well, we had our graduation, but they are actually exiting the program over the next week. And so we'll be adding to these numbers. But in the first 4 years, our 220 fellows have provided over 360,000 hours of service to public agencies and through hundreds of projects, touching on many of the things that are central to climate, water, and sustainability progress across the state. Most of our projects, the vast majority, have met or exceeded the goals set by the local governments we're serving. And our fellows are definitely succeeding in moving out into the field in a meaningful way. Over 70% of them are still working in the public sector, and over 80% are working in what we consider a relevant field or attending a graduate program in a relevant field. So we really believe this model works, and we hope that we're going to be able to help you deliver success for your communities. So with that very brief overview, I want to move into some more details about CivicSpark as an AmeriCorps program. So AmeriCorps was created to, as a federally funded program where the national service movement was designed to engage Americans of all ages and backgrounds in service to address critical problems in our nation's communities. Started in 1994 with 20,000 members a year. It was increased significantly in 2008. It's currently up to about 85,000 members a year, serving in a variety of different programs, state, national Civilian Conservation Corps, VISTA. All of these are part of the AmeriCorps family. The purpose of the program is to provide participants, national service participants, who can serve communities in a defined way. Needs are addressed through that intensive service experience by dedicating a significant amount of time to attack a problem, to focus on certain areas: education, disaster services, health, environmental stewardship, economic opportunity, service to veterans and military families, and capacity building, which is the bucket that we fall into. Something fundamental to understand about AmeriCorps programs is that national service is not work. National service is service. CivicSpark Fellows are national service participants. And this is more than a concept or a word choice. It's actually embedded in federal statute and has implications for how we treat their time, their benefits. I won't really be going into it too much today, but I did want you to note this and be mindful of it. I'll touch on it a couple of different places because our fellows are not working on your projects or for your organizations. Rather, they are serving our country as one might serve the military, and California by addressing the needs we've defined through our program model. And that's ultimately where we want to orient their attention. All AmeriCorps programs, and they're united by this, beyond the concept of service, have a 3-part structure. There's what they call getting things done, which is the providing of service to address identifiable needs in the community through direct or capacity building activities, something that has a benefit. There's fellow development. AmeriCorps members are trying to expand opportunities in order to develop skills, gain experience, give them educational awards so they can go on to grow and learn. To ensure that our fellows are prepared for and benefit from their service, we often provide skills and leadership training. We also have a component of what they call strengthening communities by involving other citizens directly in service through volunteer engagement activities. So all programs have these three elements. And it's important to understand this because our program design flows from this model, and ultimately we need to feedback and align with that. No matter how much we are our own program, and we are kind of unique in the AmeriCorps portfolio, we're part of this family. And we want AmeriCorps to see themselves in what we do, who we are, and we want you all to recognize that you're part of a larger movement of national service. As with other AmeriCorps programs, CivicSpark focuses on these three core activities. The getting things done is part of our mission is building local public sector capacity. And we do this through capacity building projects for public agency beneficiaries. The strengthening communities component is done through our mission to foster lasting and authentic community engagement through volunteer engagement projects. And our fellow development component comes through our mission as a social purpose career accelerator, which we articulate through our professional development activities. While we have three core activities, as do all AmeriCorps programs, they are not equally emphasized in terms of what the fellows do throughout the service year. CivicSpark core activities are very heavily weighted towards getting things done, or capacity building in our case, which takes about 80% of the fellows' time. Strengthening communities, which is a combination of both service and training work, is only about 5% of the fellows' time. And the fellow development piece through our structured training and other professional development experiences is the other 15% of the fellows' time. Before I get into policies, I am going to pause here, see if there's any specific questions. Also, as an audio check, if anybody wants to chat in the chat bar that I'm actually being heard, it's always useful to check and make sure. If somebody has a moment to just type in a little, yeah, we hear you, that would be great. And then I know that this whole last 15 minutes has not been in vain. Thank you. Great. Thanks, James. Thanks, Adrian. With that brief overview of how CivicSpark fits into the AmeriCorps structure, I want to spend the next couple of minutes talking specifically about AmeriCorps policies. As with any federal program, AmeriCorps has clear regulations and policies. We're not going to be going over them in depth, and the forthcoming program guide will have more on this, and there are others that are important to be aware of. It's also, some of them are replicated in our service agreements in the exhibits. But today I want to, and I'm required to touch on some key ones. The minimum requirements to be an AmeriCorps member, what are called prohibited activities, what we talk about and how we understand allowable activities, the concept of non-displacement or non-duplication, what the service expectation for the fellow is, some branding requirements, and then the fellow benefits for this year. So the first thing to touch on are these minimum requirements. As AmeriCorps is a domestic program, and as such, they've decided that all candidates must be U.S. citizens, U.S. national or lawful permanent resident aliens of the United States. They have to be at least 17-year-olds. They have to clear a fingerprint criminal history background check and not have dropped out of school in order to serve with AmeriCorps. With regards to the background check, fellows cannot serve until they have completed their background check and the results are considered in our acceptance into the program. So while you may have made an offer that's been accepted to a fellow, it is still pending a clearance of a background check. I think only one out of those 220 prior fellows, or even of applicants, did we ever have to reject for a background check result. It's very, very rare in our program, but we do have to follow that policy. We do in-state and out-of-state checks as well as the National Sex Offender Registry. If your agency requires an additional background check to be done, you should let us know, you should let the fellow know, and we want to get that done before and get them cleared before September 3rd so it doesn't hang up their start with you or us. So CNCS, the Corporation for National and Community Service, has established a set of prohibited activities. These are absolute full stop, can't do things for all AmeriCorps members nationally in legislation. Any fellow who engages in these activities can be released for cause. That means they do not get their education award, they're released and prohibited from serving in AmeriCorps in the future. Fellows, generally, they can engage in many of these activities on their own time, just not while recording hours or while they're serving. I do want to note that in 1920, this year, we do need to post these prohibited activities lists at our website. So we'll be giving a poster to your fellows, an 8.5 by 11 poster, which they can put up in and around their desk somewhere. I'm not going to walk through every single one of these in detail. You had it in our application. It was in our agreement. I do want to highlight 3 of them that are more relevant for the work we do. The others are fairly straightforward as far as why, maybe not why, but what they are as far as prohibited activities. But the ones I want to call out are the attempting to influence legislation, engaging in partisan political activities, or participating in partisan political activities likely to include advocacy or for or against political parties, etc. The reason I call those out is that a lot of our fellows do get involved in what I consider policy making, which is not a partisan political activity because it's the generation of content for informational purposes, which may be the subject of political discussion by elected leaders. But as many of you are local government staff, you're also bound by the prohibition not to engage in political activity and advocacy and lobbying on behalf of your own organizations. Fellows similarly need to be kept at arm's length. If something is likely to be contentious in your community, it's something they're working on, has a dimension that is going to be potentially putting them in the front line of a conversation, just ask us and check with us, and let's be sure that they're clear before they do something. But most of you who are local governments, you also follow these same guidelines. When we have nonprofit partners, it can be a little grayer, and we've had to just go back and forth and make sure we keep the fellows in their sort of lane, so to speak. I have a question coming in from Lisa. For the criminal and sex offender, will we get confirmation they pass, and do you do level 3 offenders? I might need an explanation of a level 3 offender. We can tell you they passed. We cannot tell you any specific results, as you would also be prohibited from seeing those in your own inside. If you want to tell me what a level 3 offender means, I can maybe answer that question. There's some other prohibited activities as far as providing direct benefits to certain types of organizations or organizational activities, getting involved in voter registration drives, providing abortion services, and I guess they have a catch-all if they decide to change the rules. More important in some ways than the concept of prohibited activities, which are somewhat just granular things to be keeping in mind, is the concept of allowable activities. Allowable activities are activities aligned with those 3 main activities I described: capacity building, fellow development, and volunteer engagement. Unallowable is anything else. If we can't draw a line between what a fellow is doing and one of those 3 activities, that is an unallowable activity. So fellows can't serve on tasks that are not related to implementing one of those 3 awarded activities, things like service unconnected to a local public agency beneficiary, or non-project related administrative tasks, even things like helping to develop the scope or of a new CivicSpark fellow. Even participating in interviews could be considered an unallowable activity. It can get kind of gray, it can get kind of murky when you've got things like, you know, an administrative task for their project, or them participating in a non-project activity as a learning opportunity. Those are gray areas. We'll talk about those in a little bit, but I do, if really the thing to keep in mind is they're going to want to be helpful. They're going to want to do whatever they can do to engage in your organization. They're also junior in this project in your organization. And so it's up to you, and we ask for your support in always keeping in mind is what they're doing allowable, and that idea of being able to draw a line between their activity and one of those 3 buckets of work. And we'll talk about how we define those in a bit, but that is your job as a project partner to help keep that in mind, to help ensure that they don't get pulled into things they're not supposed to be pulled into. It's also can be really helpful to you because you joined CivicSpark. You asked us for help to do something you couldn't do otherwise that you needed assistance with. And if this person is segregated from just the day-to-day of your organization, that can be really nice so that they can stay focused on this project. So as I said, it's always a great idea to ask us if you're ever unclear, and don't ask them to do it until you're sure. Don't start something and then afterwards go, is this an allowable activity or not? So we'll get into that a little bit more. So Lisa's adding a little bit of information. California offenders are level 1, 2, and 3. Level 3 is unlikely to reoffend and are not publicly available. You know, I'd have to look into that question for you, Lisa. I'm not sure how we categorize them. We do, in California, we use LiveScan for the DOJ check, and I just know that we have some standards. I'm not allowed to look at them, only our custodian of record is, and we've set a certain standard. There are certain things that are prohibited: murder, sex offense, they would be immediately disqualified. There's certain low-level crimes that we have a little bit more discretion. I'm not sure of those levels though, and I'll try to get back to you about that. Turning to the idea of non-displacement, AmeriCorps was set up as a program to, basically subsidize, support national service. And as a result, labor was kind of concerned. Is this a way that we're just going to be undercutting real jobs? And so there's federal statutes that prohibit us from having AmeriCorps members, fellows, do any services that would result in a paid employee losing their job or a failure to hire a paid employee. And this is important. It's, again, part of your agreement with us, but it's important for me to highlight here because you want to make sure that the fellows are doing work that is not going to get done otherwise, is not somebody else's job, that they don't get pulled into answering phones when somebody's out sick. And again, it can be a protective mechanism for the scope you have in mind, but it's also important for us that we make sure we're not being seen by other employees as displacing them or potentially risking displacement. In terms of general service expectations, I want to talk about hours a little bit, or time. So fellows are expected to serve full-time through August 2nd, 2020, assuming they start on day 1, September 3rd of this year. They're also aiming to reach at least 1,700 hours by the end of the service year. That's important to keep both of those things in mind for you all, because sometimes fellows get it in their mind they're aiming for 1,700 hours, when in actuality they are aiming to serve. They've signed up for a period of time, a period of service from the day they start to the day they finish, working full-time, about 40 hours a week, including both service project and our training activities, but not to aim to hit a certain number of hours. We have built into the calendar some resources and information, timing that gives them time off. So that's a very comfortable calendar, but it's important for you all to know that they are expected to serve full-time through the end date of the program. Our calendar is designed to accommodate that very comfortably. We have roughly 40 hours built in of personal time they can take off. They don't actually log their time off, but they just have that, the calendar accommodates it. They have a certain number of holidays I'll get to at the end. So it's a comfortable calendar, we think, and on average, fellows are serving about 1,775 hours. Of the hours they serve, our contract with you is a floor to try and hit 1,300 hours, but on average, our partners are seeing more like 1,375 hours going to the project. The balance of time they spend with us over their period of their service is spent on things like service days, volunteer engagement projects, a bunch of training and network development activities. It can add up to 400 hours, but as you can see from here, it often doesn't. And so that's how we balance out their time, but it is not an absolute number that we're heading for in terms of hours. It's more just the continuous period. In terms of who's responsible for their time during various activities, you all have oversight and direction for that 1,300 plus hours of project service mostly. You will also be engaged with them during the first couple weeks on the job. We log that time as project prep. It does include some on-site orientation, probably some onboarding activities that you would do, the start of our gap assessments, which I'll talk about later. The rest of their time is our responsibility to direct and coordinate, and that includes the things you see here. Getting a little bit deeper into hours, just showing you how we break it down. The primary breakdown of hours is between service and training, which is fellow development. Service should be no less than 80% of the hours, and training at the end of the year should be no more than 20% of hours. This is what those things can include. And you'll see that really any project activity, including some of the admin related to it, time cards, progress reports, things that are required by us but are also serving the project, are considered service hours for your project. Any project-specific training provided by you for implementation of the project activity wouldn't be counted as training, it would be counted as service. Their service days, which you don't directly do count as service, but they are under our direction. Same with the volunteer engagement projects, and if they have to do something else like jury duty, it does count as service. Training hours or orientation, CivicSpark events, the time spent with our staff, and RC is a regional coordinator. Some meetings with you all, when not specifically for project tasks, can be counted as training. They have about 24 hours during the service year. They can log time if you want to take them to or send them to a training event. Uniform expectations. All AmeriCorps participants across the nation have to wear uniforms at all times when serving. No exceptions. Most programs have a full uniform, a jacket, a t-shirt, some sort of full uniform they wear every single day. For CivicSpark, because we're often serving in very professional settings and having to interact with a range of stakeholders, often at a leadership level, it wasn't really a great fit. So we've been able to come up with a system to utilize pins, one for AmeriCorps, one for CivicSpark, as our uniform. That is our uniform. The simplicity of this uniform is really nice. It's adaptable to any clothes, anywhere. But the simplicity also means people often forget. If they are serving out of uniform and somebody sees them from California Volunteers, Corporation for National Community Service, they see a poster, a news release, and it doesn't have them in uniform, they can have their hours revoked. So it's really important that you help support us, and if you see your fellows and they're not in uniform, i.e. wearing their pins, call them out on it, let them know, take it seriously, this matters. It seems like a small thing, and we've made it a pretty modest and not intrusive thing, but it is actually super important to keep it up on. Just a quick note on branding. AmeriCorps wants to make sure that people know where AmeriCorps is happening, as does California Volunteers, as does the Local Government Commission. And so we have some required branding that we have to keep in mind. The use of certain logos, the use of certain taglines. This doesn't really affect you all, except for this last column. So at our placement sites, we need to somewhere display the logo, the taglines. The way we do that is we provide a poster for all our fellows. It's a Rosie the Riveter type AmeriCorps poster. I think it was on one of my earlier slides, and it says AmeriCorps serving here. That's the requirement to meet that need. And lastly, as far as policies, I just want to touch on the benefits for 2019-20. So we were successful in raising our stipend for fellows this year to $20,000, which in the AmeriCorps world is actually on the higher end, surprisingly. Still, it is a very, very modest income, and we hope you're mindful of that when you're asking these folks to work long hours. They're doing it for the service purpose, not for the money. Generally, you get an education award with AmeriCorps through something called the Siegel Education Award. This year it's $6,095. It goes up a little bit every year. Amazingly, Governor Newsom has matched that with an additional $3,905, bringing the total education award this year to $10,000. We hope that that becomes a permanent contribution, but this year alone it's going to be great. There is health care if it's desired. Food stamps, AmeriCorps members, this is one of those areas where their service and not work comes into play. Their stipend does not count towards food stamps calculations, and that's really helpful. It can be a couple $100s a month. There's forbearance on student loans and childcare if needed. So I'll take a break here. If you have any questions on the policy side before I turn to the implementation, feel free to chat me questions. Or I can continue and people can ask me questions as they come up. I'll just pause for a second here to see if anybody has any questions. Not seeing anything. I'm going to move on to implementation. So how do we actually run CivicSpark? As I highlighted earlier, like all AmeriCorps programs, we do three things. Capacity building, fellow development, volunteer engagement. I'm going to talk through each one, what it is, what it means, and how we operationalize it, including our program goals. For any of you who I was the person who did the intake interview, I've touched on this in a certain level with you previously, but this gives us a chance to go a little bit deeper and unpack it a little bit more and hopefully leave you with a firmer understanding of them. So we're going to talk about capacity building, which is by far the biggest piece to talk about. While this may be obvious to some of you, I want to highlight our outlook on why capacity building matters. Local government resources are often very limited, which means that maintaining status quo activities can take up the majority of those resources, leaving little capacity or resources to diagnose or respond to emerging opportunities and challenges. The threats that we're facing, climate change, drought, the affordable housing crisis, mobility challenges, the digital divide, are unprecedented in scale and complexity, which means that addressing them requires new knowledge, innovative policy approaches, and often more dynamic solutions, which, given the constraints I just mentioned, can be hard to develop. Those solutions are often better addressed through integrated approaches, for example, considering climate and housing together. These require strong internal coordination and deeper community engagement, which, again, can be challenging for under-resourced local governments. For all of these reasons, the persistent capacity gaps that we see, that I believe you feel every day out there among local governments, are a significant factor in the perpetuation or even exacerbation of resilience challenges, whether they be environmental or social equity related. I think you all would recognize your own situation or that of your communities in that description. So we all know that capacity building matters, but how do we define it? What is it? Well, AmeriCorps actually, it's a separate category from other activities. We chose capacity building because we recognize that local governments are in very different places. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do through our service is not any one thing, but it's to put you all as local governments or those who are supporting local governments in a better place to sustain and respond to challenges in the future. So the way that AmeriCorps currently defines capacity building is a set of activities that expand the scale, reach, efficiency, or effectiveness of programs or organizations. And these activities should support or enhance program delivery models, respond to organizational goals, enable organizations to provide a sustained level of more or better direct services. So this is what we're trying to address through our systems, our processes, and our measures. And I think you'll recognize most of the project activities you have in mind fit into that definition. You're trying to develop a climate action plan. You are responding to an organizational goal. You are enhancing your delivery models. You are hopefully, through that climate action plan, going to provide a sustained level of more or better direct services. You're trying to field a new program. That's also going to do the same thing: support goals, enhance delivery, and expand services. So I think you'll recognize yourself in that definition. So with that context, we've built CivicSpark to respond to that. So this is the idea: local governments need expanded capacity to manage emerging threats. Unfortunately, AmeriCorps is a bit of a deficit model. It's not about opportunities, it's about threats. And they can be in a variety of areas depending on our program track: climate change, opportunity access, which is housing, infrastructure, any number of social equity challenges, and then the broader resiliency, which frankly is a catch-all to give us even more room to operate in. Water projects this year will all be in the resiliency track because we lost that grant, and that's where they're going to fit. And hopefully, ultimately, we will consolidate into one grant with a resiliency frame that will accommodate the most flexibility. So our model tries to leverage the strengths of the AmeriCorps Fellows Service to provide that capacity building support, to deliver resources, to build stakeholder relationships, and through the experience of working with the fellow, maybe actually growing new tools and resources and understanding at the local government level. Our approach to doing this work is to start with defining the needs in the community, developing and executing a project, and then transitioning that project at the end so that we can sustain some of the gain. We do that through 5 steps, and these 5 steps relate very closely to how we measure and operationalize all of our activities in a way that gives us flexibility for fellows to do a range of project activities, but also allows us to capture things and systematize it to a degree. So I'm going to talk about each one of these in turn. So the pre-service capacity assessment is a baseline understanding of capacity needs, general goals, and kind of the kind of capacity in the agency to address the issues we're being asked to work on. The capacity assessments are completed by eligible local government beneficiaries. In AmeriCorps terms, the target of a fellow's service is the beneficiary. If I'm running an after-school program for third graders on literacy, my beneficiary is those third graders. If I'm doing trail maintenance in the field, the miles of trail are my beneficiary, or the forest health might be my beneficiary. In our case, the beneficiary are local government agencies. They can be counties, cities, towns, regional public agencies, MPOs, school districts, etc. Those are who we are serving. Eligibility, like all AmeriCorps programs, we have to figure out who is eligible to get this service. Are all local governments everywhere eligible? We've created an eligibility criteria that has 3 tiers. You would have seen it in the application, and you may have been one of the people doing the pre-service survey. If you didn't provide it, there's an opportunity to provide it there. But we started off by saying there's some indicators of distress in many communities: high DAC score, disadvantaged community, higher unemployment, low opportunity. There's a regional opportunity index, things like that. We have about 4 metrics by which we are defining impact. And if we meet those metrics, that's it. Because frankly, if you're impacted in those ways, you're very likely to be struggling with capacity, irregardless of anything else. If you meet that criteria, the next criteria is the absence of a plan. So if you don't have a plan to address housing, or your plan is woefully out of date, you clearly have a capacity gap that can be benefited by service. The final tier is maybe you have a plan, maybe you're not in one of those impacted categories, but within that plan there may be defined goals that you're clearly not going to meet. And demonstrating that you know what those goals are, but you can say that you have a reason to believe you're not going to meet them, is also a category of eligibility. So assuming that a local government meets one of those 3, we can serve them. And within the pre-service capacity assessment, there's really 2 major parts. I mean, there's some background information. There's kind of some baseline measures of capacity, asking about stakeholder and leadership and staffing capacity. But the most important part to know about is we ask the local government, the beneficiary who's completing the survey, to nominate 3 goals they have for this project. And those goals are in 3 areas: agency understanding, program development, and stakeholder engagement. And the reason we do this is because capacity building is not just about delivering a product, a report, a plan. It's also about building understanding at the staff level so that folks actually have the knowledge to act on what they've worked on. And it's about relationships, because if you don't have the support of leadership or community support, it's very hard to act on any good plan that you might have out there. So we've operationalized or conceptualized capacity building in those 3 dimensions. And those 3 goals form the basis for understanding and grounding our work in capacity building and making sure we're tying it to the needs of a local government. Something important to note for those of you who are site supervisors and partners but may have other beneficiaries, mostly my state partners on the line or my nonprofit partners on the line, but some of you are also local government partners who will have other departments who will be beneficiaries, or even be working in collaboration with other local governments. We do allow for that setup. It isn't the case that every partner who is hosting a fellow is also the beneficiary. It's definitely the majority, but not. We have many partners who are not the beneficiary. You wouldn't be here today if it wasn't okay with us to do that. But a nonprofit or a state agency can host a fellow, but they can't be the beneficiary. While similarly, sometimes, as I mentioned, we have more than one local government beneficiary or across multiple agencies. So sometimes the site supervisor is one beneficiary, but not all of them. So it's important to keep that distinction in mind, because it's the beneficiary's goals the fellows are serving. It is not the state agency or the nonprofit. The reason we make this work is because many times state agencies have similar or aligned interests to local governments, but we need to make sure we can point to and draw a line to a local government who said, I need this. And that's why we are, with any of our state partners and our NGO partners, always asking to get that set up in advance so we're really clear what that link is and that it's a meaningful link. So this is why, for those of you who are on this position, you need to get this set up in advance. So we're really clear what the scope is, how it relates to a beneficiary's capacity needs. It's also really important that you not just treat this like a check the box exercise, because then that person down the line, when the fellow starts engaging with them, might be like, I don't know, really, this, I just did a favor for so-and-so. We don't really want that. We want a legitimate connection there. It's also an area where if you're in this position, you can further support our fellows by working to make sure that we do this meaningfully and upfront. And this is intended to be done before the fellow starts, so that it provides a framework and connection to specific needs and ensures we are serving needs relevant to our program design. So hopefully that's clear what that's about. You all will have been getting nudges from me or Danielle or maybe some of our other staff to get these done now and or clarify who the target beneficiaries are. We've got about 5 weeks to go, a little less, so we're really trying to dial those in now. The next step is the gap assessment. The purpose of the gap assessment is to further provide the fellow context, ground the service in the capacity goals for the beneficiaries, and align the scope that is going to emerge over the year with those goals. It is not intended to replace or serve as a full scoping activity. It's more of a compass and alignment step at a high level to make sure that we all are kind of pointed in the same direction and we can tie back to capacity building goals. In terms of process, this is completed by the fellow, unlike the capacity assessment, which is done by the beneficiary. They review the capacity assessment, absolutely critical. They have that in hand to work with. They interview staff. They're going to definitely interview the local agency beneficiary contact, who may be the site supervisor, may not be. If not, they'll also talk to the site supervisor and others as needed. There may be a couple key stakeholders that the site supervisor who's leading this project is going to direct them to talk to. They're going to briefly, and I want to emphasize briefly, review at a high level key policy and programmatic documents to see and understand some of the context for their work. The content of the gap assessment, which is short, is a summary of the documents reviewed and the people interviewed, a high level outline, again, not the whole scope, of the specific projects or project that the fellow will be working on, an initial transition plan for the close of service, something, what are they going to do to hand it off at the end, and bulleted, bold, highlight any needed refinements to capacity building goals. Can't emphasize this enough. Definitely want to engage in this process. Don't just treat it as a CivicSpark activity, because as you'll see at the bottom, the other bolded point here is the goals from the gap assessment form the boundary of allowable capacity building activities. Going back to what I said about allowable and unallowable activities, if we or anybody asks, what is this person doing? We want to draw a line to those goals, because that's how we show that they are doing capacity building for a local government beneficiary. We also want it to be broad in those goals so that they are reasonable, achievable, not so specific that we get hung up on the minutia of activities, tasks, and deliverables in the goals, but that they are set up in a way that they give you flexibility to implement the project, to adjust to changing circumstances on the ground, but they're clear enough that we can say this is or is not inside this goal. Hopefully that's all clear for you. We have one per beneficiary. If you have multiple beneficiaries in the same agency, at this time we're still requiring at the startup that separate people fill out those to represent different departments or initiatives within the organization. A fellow cannot do a gap assessment without a capacity assessment. From what I've said so far, that should be fairly obvious. It's also important that they not start primary service activities without completing that gap assessment. We want those to be done in the can and in place before they really dive off the deep end in the project. And so something that we're trying to message to you all is these are high level, these are short. They should ideally take 15 to 20 hours, but no more than 30. Don't get people, people try and treat them like a full scope, or they try and read every document. We've got some really amazing kind of deeply intentional fellows, and they can get really bogged down at this stage, and we don't want to do that. The next step is the service project itself. And while I'll say a lot today, I'll say the least about what is the biggest part of what's going on, because all of your projects are very different, and I don't have a lot of very granular guidance or requirements around this. This is part of the program design, is to get stuff done at the beginning and the end and leave you more freedom in the middle. But Generally, we see the project as the vehicle for capacity building. They often fall into kind of research, planning, implementation activities, some mix. There might be multiple projects. Your vision of the project may be multiple years, whereas we bound the fellow's investment within 11 months. These are the main focus of your work. That's why you brought us in, to do this work. And we see lots of ways this can be effective, and we see lots of opportunities for growth for the fellow in this. One of the requirements we do have for the service project work itself at this stage is that the fellows will be sharing progress updates at least monthly to all their beneficiaries. We have been somewhat remiss on this in the past. We're really trying to make sure that we sustain engagement with the beneficiaries. If they're not the site supervisor, this is where it becomes more significant, at least through a progress report. If they will still do a progress report to their site supervisor if that is the beneficiary, but we'll use that more as a touchstone for when our staff check in with you, then it will be a proper progress report, because frankly, you're probably going to be talking to the person every week and it may seem a bit redundant. But it is a requirement that we do this to make sure that everybody's informed at least monthly about the project activities. The fourth step are what we call transitional activities. The goal of this is to help sustain what we did beyond the length of the AmeriCorps service. So as a capacity building program, the goal is not just to do the work during the year, it's to do something that leaves something behind. And so we have designed an intentional process by which the fellow talks upfront with you all about potential transitional activities. And as they wind down their project, they look to implement those so that they're connecting with their beneficiaries in a meaningful way through staff training, through presentations to councils. It can be a really wide open place there. We just don't want them to kind of hit send on that last email and walk away. They're clearly going to deliver documents or plans, but we want them to share their results with key stakeholders. We have a structure to wrap things up in a report that includes also a best practice case study that goes to the Office of Planning and Research. And also we use an aggregate to understand the impacts of the program, and a poster that we share statewide at our graduation and also beyond. And the goal here is, again, to transfer knowledge, build action throughout the community so that we can sustain the capacity gains. Something that has often come up in these efforts is, well, people ask us, well, this project's going to keep going. Why do we have to put a wrapper around it? Well, AmeriCorps is doing service in a fixed period of time, and we want to make sure our service has an outcome, even if the larger project is going to continue. It also is not for any of you, since you're all new partners, but for returning partners, they wonder, well, year over year, how do we bridge that? We still have to treat them all in separate buckets. Historically, the transitional activities and transitional reports have been super useful for partners, useful for fellows, meaningful for them to try and think about organizing their work. If we don't require something, you would, might just roll things over, or you might have them wrap it up. This helps us, again, systematize things. But I want to emphasize, it's meant to be a wrapper around your work, not a separate new activity or report. So if you have a major report, this might just be they just might package it a little differently for us in order to deliver it in this way, but it's not meant to rewrite or write a whole new thing. The last step in our capacity building activities is the post-service capacity assessment. Sort of the stronger AmeriCorps program designs have pre-post structure. So we're trying to make sure we get a measure at the beginning and a measure at the end so that we can see a net change. These surveys are completed by the same local government beneficiaries. It is done by sending out an email with a link to the survey and the gap assessment goals that were finalized through the gap assessment. And so again, it's super important that those goals be suitable to the project and the project not drift too far from those goals, or really be able to, as I said, draw a line back, because at the end we want to go to that beneficiary and say, hey, the fellow did this, they gave you their transitional presentation, and how did we do? Did we leave you with resources you're going to continue to use to expand your scale, reach, and effectiveness? We also go back to the same kind of general baseline measures and try and see if there's been net change in other dimensions of capacity for the organization. It's absolutely vital that you support us on this post-service capacity assessment. It's the end of the year. Everybody's like, oh, I'm done. I'm moving on. Maybe I'm working on my new fellow, whatever it might be. And this is the last piece, but it is the most important piece for us as a program, because if we don't show this outcome, right or wrong, if we don't gather it, we can't count it. And it's like that fellow didn't serve. And so we really want your help to reach 100% response rate on these so that we can fully capture the benefits of the program and continue to offer it to California. I'll touch really briefly on the goals we have as a program. They're kind of strangely written here because we have 3 tracks. So I gave you target numbers for our outputs, which is the first bullet, and our outcomes, which is the second, by climate, opportunity, access, and resiliency. And you'll see they're varied there in part because the programs are of different size. But the output is the near-term activity that happens. And in this case, we want to see a certain number of local government beneficiaries get at least 200 hours of capacity building service. Most of them get closer to full 1,300 or half of 1,300 if there's 2. Of those, we want to see at least some number of them in each track demonstrate that they have become more effective, efficient, or have an increased scale by reporting that at least one of the 3 goals that we defined were met. And that's it, right? At the end of the day, we want to say we defined a goal, we met that goal, and some number of local governments have benefited from that. We have additional elements there that help provide context, narrative, and explanation of it. But at the end of the day, it's that fundamental question. Did we meet a goal that was set by that local government for increasing their capacity? For those of you who are in the climate or opportunity access track, and you may or may not know which you are, we may be coming back to you, and I may have come back to you already, to see if we can expand from 1 beneficiary to 2 or more. When we tried to consolidate, we reduced our targets, which is what you see in the resiliency side, to more like 1-to-1, 1 beneficiary per fellow with a little bit of loss built in. When it wasn't approved, we had to go back to our old numbers. And so that's why we're asking you, because when we designed the program, we were thinking each fellow might serve 2 or more beneficiaries, and that was the general target we're aiming for. So if your project naturally lends itself to being broken up across 2 project activities, departments, or agencies, please let us know if you're curious and if you can help us in that way. We're trying not to require it of people yet. We're trying to stick with it being more flexible. So this is a summary of all of what I've just said. This is going to be on a handout that will come with the program guide nearer to the start date. I'm not going to go over it here, but I really wanted to just close on this note so that you can see how our mission, we support our mission by establishing local capacity building goals, defining allowable capacity building activities, checking that we're making progress toward those goals, and ultimately measuring and ensuring outcomes are realized. So now I'm going to move on to fellow development, the second leg of our 3-legged stool here. This and volunteer engagement are going to be briefer than the capacity building because they are less of the emphasis of the program, and you as partners are less involved with implementation. Overall, we believe that fellows should be appropriately trained to perform the services assigned to increase both their professional skills, community development skills, and to enhance their cohort experience and their leadership in the field beyond. Fellow development occurs in many places through both structured and unstructured experience, and broadly we see it happening in 3 different areas. Through the day-to-day experience of working with you all on their service project. While we don't track this time as fellow development, as in training hours, the on-the-job experience we recognize is the most meaningful and impactful developmental opportunity that we are offering the fellows. You've opened the door to this project work, and that is a phenomenal developmental opportunity. We supplement that through structured training opportunities provided throughout the year. Over the last 5 years, we've built a strong program of direct and remote trainings, learning opportunities that are designed to enhance service work and cultivate leadership. And finally, there's indirect support we provide through check-ins, professional guidance. Certainly not as often as you all, but these direct conversations are often central to their experience as they provide a unique platform for the fellow to troubleshoot and talk about their goals and needs outside of the day-to-day project or organizational context. I want to sort of double down, if you will, on the importance of the site experience and your role as part of the fellow development experience. Your projects, the activities undertaken, the stakeholders involved, your personal outlook and approach as a supervisor is key to the learning and growth experience here. you really are the representative of this organization, this work and community, and they will learn by proxy so much from you. We have systems and processes that support this, but this is a key place for you to engage, and I'll talk about that when we get to roles a bit. What we do through our structured and indirect support on our side is intended to enrich and extend the service experience. We want CivicSpark provided activities to complement, not compete with the service project experience that you all are working on with them. And we hope that we were working in partnership to enrich your overall outcomes and activities. So turning to the structured trainings and activities that we do all year, I'm going to go through each one very briefly so you have a sense of what we're offering. And I will tell you, and if you've worked with any other AmeriCorps programs, we have a really rich curriculum that we're offering here. We have a really well-structured, I think well-developed, doesn't meet everybody's needs perfectly, nothing ever can, but it's far more direct contact and direct engagement and support than many programs offer. And I think our history in terms of successful outcomes with the fellows and for partners is evidence that this is really valuable, even though it does take time away from your projects. So we have 3 major events a year where statewide all fellows get together. We have our orientation coming up in Coloma, California, September 3rd through 7th. We have our mid-year gathering, 2 days in February, and the location will be TBD. We have our graduation, another 2 days just happened in mid-July, amazing opportunity and celebration. The content is a lot of stuff at a broad level on policies and procedures, this kind of stuff. Tools and techniques for the program elements we implement, like volunteer recruitment. Topical sessions on broad issues like local governments, equity, state policies. We do have sector-specific breakouts on things like water, housing, energy. And we also talk about larger leadership, professionalism, communication, and career development. While we feel these direct conversations, these direct gathering points are really important to establish rapport, common purpose, some shared knowledge. All of our staff work really hard on these events, and they're generally pretty well received. We bring in outside speakers. We try and provide a mix of soft skills, program-specific skills. As you can imagine, orientation is heavily tilted towards program startup and just learning how to be a CivicSpark fellow. The mid-year gathering is often focused on reflection, thinking about leadership, refreshing and rebooting because it's in the midpoint of the year, and thinking about life afterwards. And graduation is a time to reflect, share outcomes, and celebrate our accomplishments. Regional trainings are somewhat similar in that they're intended to build knowledge and cohesion and team connections at a regional level. They tend to go a little deeper and often try and connect local resources and partners to training activities. Since the fellows are working across many diverse topics and communities, they are more on professionalism and general project implementation than on any specific sector skills. Our statewide webinars, which are offered monthly, are organized by our statewide staff and RCs. They provide a platform to share common tech topics that are of use to all fellows and often to bring in outside speakers who we could not bring to a specific local event. We're beginning to utilize an archive so that we can have some general topics that we repeat year over year, like an Excel 101, so that they can be provided on demand, and reserve those statewide webinars for more focused topics or ones where a live speaker is really beneficial. Partners have asked in the past if they can come to either regional training, statewide webinars, or what have you. We're trying to make sure we more regularly invite folks, you all, to these, and if that's of interest, that you have the opportunity to participate. Network calls used to be called sector calls, like they were broken out by topic, housing, water, waste, etc. We're calling them network calls because really what they're about is bringing together fellows who are working in similar topical areas to get together to talk with peers, to sometimes hear about from an outside expert, to build their knowledge base and ideally grow their network in this space. We're going to be organizing them in 3 thematic groups this year: healthy community design, which will include housing, transportation, and a couple other issues, climate and energy, and then water. Those groups are in part defined by the number of fellows we have in those areas. On these calls, fellows will get to share resources with each other, ask questions, identify solutions. We also hope by giving them an opportunity to work collectively across a field, they can grow their understanding of relevant networks they might tap into to be effective in their project work or afterwards in their career. Leadership roles is another functional area that we support. This is where fellows have an opportunity to play a more significant role in an area of interest outside their service work. It's a time-limited role. They can usually spend about 20 hours a year on this. That's what we're estimating. It's tracked as training time, so it doesn't impact your projects, but gives the fellows a chance to do something different, like working on a regional newsletter, being on our equity committee, helping arrange and do trainings for service days, providing support to some of these sector or network calls. It's meant to empower the fellows to take on other projects and gain skills they might not develop in their service work and contribute to a larger regional cohort, which helps build their network overall. Service days are actually service. We don't count them as training, but I'm lumping them here as part of fellow development because they are a learning opportunity. They happen about 4 times a year. They're usually about a half-day activity where the cohort gets together, often with other AmeriCorps members. Service days are national in nature, so all AmeriCorps members are out in the field on Martin Luther King Day or Cesar Chavez Day. There's a couple other dates that are either TBD or in the works. But they're participating in some visible community service activity, cleanups on a beach, removal of native species, that kind of thing. All AmeriCorps members, as I said, participate in these service around the country. We've started to do something a little different in that usually a service day doesn't take up the whole day. And so we're trying to combine it with a service learning, peer learning opportunity. For example, having a fellow who works in the community where the activity is happening provides some context for that community so that we can build knowledge, get some understanding, and hopefully enrich the service experience. As with capacity building, we have to operationalize fellow development. We do this by working with you as partners and site supervisors to identify fellow growth areas, engage around them, and track progress. Our process has 3 major elements. A professional assessment at the start of the year, usually after about a month. This is usually preceded by some conversations with the fellows about their goals. You may do that as part of your onboarding anyway. The assessment is intended to capture a baseline of where the fellow's at, not your glowing assessment of them during the honeymoon phase. We really want you to think about because it's like a rating scale, there's a 1 to 5. We're thinking you go down the middle where they're at with some variation from where they're really exceptional or really need some development, but they're kind of right down the middle because we're going to come back to you at the end of the year and we're going to say, where did we see some growth? So if you give them all 5s because you're really having a great time with them in the first month, there's no room for growth. So think about it as a baseline. We also want you to document their goals, their professional development goals, which hopefully you're getting from them from conversations. This forms the basis of a conversation with us and with you about how to realize these goals and their areas of growth during the service year through the project activity or through what we provide. Around midpoint of the service year, we have a check-in conversation to review the goals that were defined. This provides a chance to check on progress, identify mid-course corrections, talk about what we can do for the remainder of the year to support these goals and leverage the experience for life after CivicSpark. Finally, we meet again at the end of the year to complete another performance assessment. You'll do one, as will the fellow and the regional coordinator, and you'll meet and discuss outcomes, learnings, and achievement. And ideally, this whole process provides a framework. It's just 3 measures in time, but it's really intended to provide a framework for you, the fellow, and our regional coordinator to keep their development in mind, to support their growth and development throughout the whole service year. Similarly to capacity building, we have output and outcome goals for fellow development. It's the same structure I showed you in a previous slide, different target numbers for the different tracks. But in this case, it's a set number of fellows will complete at least 70% of the core training hours, which are about 100 hours. So we look at how many fellows will complete at least 70 hours by the time they're done. Almost all of them. It's very rare that somebody doesn't have 70 hours. Just getting through orientation, graduation, and your gathering is probably close to 100 hours. Of those fellows who complete that core training, we want to see an increase in skills, professional engagement, service commitment in at least one of the 3 measure categories by at least 1 of 5 points. We take all the questions on the survey and we group them into professionalism, leadership, and technical capacity. So here's another summary of the elements of fellow development. This will also be part of that summary handout I mentioned. So I want to say again, we support our mission by training fellows on how to deliver high quality service to the community, provide capacity building support aimed at helping local governments meet their goals and aimed at developing their leadership and commitment to service. So we hope that our program structure reinforces that social purpose career pipeline. And on balance, we are seeing that. As I noted earlier on, it's sort of the stats, the vast majority of our fellows are staying in the field, staying in the public sector, and growing into positions of leadership across California and beyond. So the last piece is volunteer engagement. This is the smallest piece, and it's the piece you have the least to be involved with, but it is good to know about. So the purpose of volunteer engagement is to support volunteers, not the fellows, but other volunteers to address community needs related to the track-related issues. So if you're in the climate track, you want to work on a volunteer engagement project related to climate change. This has benefits and value for different participants. For the community, local government, beneficiaries, agencies, or the community as a whole, it can be adapted to existing programs. It builds volunteer engagement, and it provides an opportunity to connect volunteers and with local governments. For the fellows, it's a professional development activity. It builds understanding of the community they're serving and the needs in that community. And for our program as a whole, it helps link together the other program activities, our capacity building and fellow development, by providing a platform for fellow learning, a resource for community support, and hopefully increases our impact and extends our networks. Christian is asking, is there a packet provided by CivicSpark to assist the beneficiary to track the needs and requirements for the fellow? We provide a program guide to you as the project partner who's managing the project. And so it's you're the supervisor of the project, so you're the one who's holding on to that. You may in turn pass along some of that information to the beneficiary if you're not the beneficiary. And so working with your CivicSpark fellow, that's going to be the mechanism by which we do that. So by having the fellow develop the gap assessment goals that align with the project you have in mind as a non-beneficiary partner, and having them connected with a beneficiary who's kind of like, yeah, I'm excited about this project. That's how we keep on that. We don't, if the beneficiary is not the site supervisor, we rely on you to make sure that things are communicated clearly to them because they're a part of your project. So overall, our approach to volunteerism is a little different than some programs. Some programs have it baked in a very particular structure. We treat it like an independent learning opportunity for the fellow to go out and identify something of interest, to work with you potentially, but not necessarily to grow, to invest their time in this work. But they will look for a means to increase volunteer engagement by establishing some new volunteer program or enhancing an existing program relevant to their track-in. For example, finding a community group that is hosting an event that they can support. The fellows will coordinate with our staff, our regional coordinators, to determine the appropriate audience and approach. So again, you're not responsible for it. They can spend up to 100 hours on it. It should, and always ideally will, include actual volunteers being involved in it. We've had some gaps in that one in the past. But it can be a great way if you have a volunteer program in your organization or know of a community group that's part of your project to kind of connect the service work with the volunteer engagement project. But we do give the fellow a bit of autonomy to pick the project of interest. We are really encouraging them to serve locally, not kind of do it as a big group project across a region. These are our goals for volunteer engagement. A little different structure than with the other two areas. There is no outcome goal. There's only an output goal for volunteer engagement. And in this case, they're different by size. So we're looking for the number of ongoing or one-time volunteers. One time is like they just came out to a one-day event. Ongoing is they come week over week and serve in some capacity. And the number of hours provided by those volunteers. And this is aggregate across the whole program. It's not actually very large in terms of numbers. If we've got 50 AmeriCorps in the climate track, we've got 50 fellows. That's only, each one needs to find on average 1 ongoing volunteer and 3 one-time volunteers. So really not hard numbers to hit, but it is a good, interesting element of the program. And as before, this is the summary page that you will be getting and shows how our program is structured to deliver on this activity. As if that wasn't enough, I've now gone through all 3 elements of the program. We have what we call the CivicSpark program arc that I'll talk through briefly, that is a visual representation of the entire program year and all the elements of it. This will be in the program guide. It'll be a little different than this one because this is this year's and we're updating it a little bit, but I thought I would just show you how we've kind of visually laid out the service year in these areas. So we kind of divide the year up into the startup period, the project implementation period, and the transitional period. In the startup period, on capacity building, a lot of what we're focused on is the gap assessment, the early stage implementation, big learning curve for the fellow. They're really getting into things, they're developing their scope in detail. Our trainings are designed to support initial stages. Volunteer engagement is not a big activity at this point. It usually starts later on in the service year. As we get into the project implementation phase, roughly the next 5 months, and that's not like a fixed time frame, it's just approximate to give you a sense of things. Project activity is very much underway. You know, we're really doing the project. That is the lion's share of what's going on. Trainings start to cover a broader range of topics and concepts around leadership, but also kind of getting a deeper understanding of government issues. We have our mid-year gathering. We start to then think about more career development trainings at the end of that period. The volunteer engagement project we start to identify the project, start to develop the plan, and look to implement in the latter part of it. As we get to the transition period, we're really finishing up that volunteer engagement project, wrapping up our project, doing all of our closeout, our transitional activities, and the training is really squarely looking at career development, interviewing, resume development, and kind of life after AmeriCorps. Hopefully this gives you a visual, which again, you'll get a copy of, but it gives you a visual of how we've conceptualized this whole set of activities across the entire service year. A good time to maybe break for some questions. I've now gotten through, and I think I'm a little bit ahead of schedule, probably 3/5 of this presentation, if not more. So if anybody has any questions on the implementation side of the content, I'd be happy to take those now, or I can keep going. Looks like no particular questions at this moment. So let's talk about roles and responsibilities. The first thing I want to emphasize is that we see this as a three-way relationship between you all as partners, our fellows, and our program staff, particularly our regional coordinators. We approach things this way because we believe, and our experience bears this out, this is a collective effort for which the benefit and value for all parties are more likely to be realized when we are mindful and committed to a strong working relationship with each other. More than any particular project activity or program feature, the quality of our working relationships between the regional site coordinator, the site supervisor, and the fellow can significantly influence outcomes for each. Additionally, there's a few other pieces that are kind of important to keep in mind in this relationship space. We all are coming at this from a motivation of a commitment to service, to our communities, to our regions, to the state, to the planet. This is what drives us. This is what brought us together. And so we all can keep that in mind as we engage with each other, that we're trying to aim for the same goal. It's also really important that we have effective communication. This is a funny setup, right? Our fellows are getting be embedded with you, but they're our fellows. We have a relationship with you. We have a relationship with them. We do stuff with them that you're not part of. So communication can go wrong. So ideally, successful experience depends on having really good positive engagement and effective communication, especially when challenges arise, which they may. Doesn't always happen, but if they do, we want to make sure that we're trying to be thoughtful about how we engage with each other and communicate. Finally, you all have chosen to tackle these issues through CivicSpark. And as a result, we want you to support our core activities, the part I just outlined, so that we can be effective in our work, remain aligned in our mission, and not feel like you're kind of doing stuff because we said so. We want you to understand why, which is why I've spent time on it in this presentation, and hopefully support and endorse so that the fellow who's also new to this can feel that they're able to stay true to that, and we all can support the mission that we have and the work that we want to have and achieve through this. So I'm going to talk through each of the roles here very briefly. I'm not going to go into the granular too much. Some of that is in our agreement. Some of that will be in the program guide. I wanted to start at a more conceptual level, and some of this language is coming out of a new program feature that we're adding. Since you're all new, you wouldn't know that in past years we've had a site supervisor and fellow agreement where we kind of laid out some expectations and both sides signed it. It ended up being a lot of repeat from both of your contracts. And we are not going to do that this year. We're moving it into more of a shared expectations framing so that we're all clear about what those shared expectations, and we're including us in that. So it's a three-way document where we outline key intent for all of us and then for each of us. And hopefully we can all confirm that, yeah, we're all on the same page here. We're going to use that as a resource to have effective relationships as we go forward. So on your side, we have a few sort of bullet points here. We want you to support the program goals and our fellows' obligation by ensuring that we stay true to these allowable non-prohibited activities and letting us know that if anything is not in alignment with our goals so that we can try and come up with a solution. We're super creative at finding ways to meet your needs within our program structure, but if you don't ask us, we can't help you. We want folks to identify those fellows as AmeriCorps fellows and referring to their activities as service. We want to support the required capacity building activities by making sure all those 5 steps are followed. And when something comes up and there's a change and you've got a new project idea, you stop and ask us first and we make sure we can fit it within the framework. We want to support fellow professional development by providing oversight of a robust project that's meaningful, substantial, and appropriate, providing clear guidance to the fellow, participating in all of the performance assessment pieces, helping to use that assessment to guide their support, and ultimately directing the fellow towards opportunities in the future. Obviously, we want to establish an appropriate professional experience through an appropriate professional office with technology, addressing issues and concerns with the fellow as needed, providing support yet as appropriate, and notifying us if there's issues. And finally, we want to support the fellow's progress and growth through consistent communications, making sure that we're having those check-ins regularly, weekly, especially for the high-performing fellows who you can use it as a springboard to go further, making sure to inform us of changes in the scope and keeping us informed of their professional growth. I'm going to talk next about some of the specifics from the agreement, and I want to make sure that you all, if you're the key point of contact for us, you may not be the only person engaging with the fellow. So it's really important that you go through the details and the exhibits of our agreement, which I'll touch on a few here, with any key staff who are working with the fellows, because we want to make sure that they're not coming in and you're the only one who knows what their role is and their purpose and what their allowable activities are. So again, not going to go down through all of these in detail, but just wanted to highlight a couple of them from our agreement with you. So there is one person who's going to be a site supervisor who meets regularly with the fellow. We want to know who that is. We want to make sure that that person is engaged with the program, understands the requirements, and we can use as a key point of contact. Sometimes we've ended up with situations where it was unclear and the fellow felt adrift. Who is that person and where are they and how do we know how to get in touch with them? We want to make sure those project scopes are really clear and aligned with our goals. We want to be informed. We want to get our local government beneficiaries set up in advance. We want to make sure that folks complete the pre and post surveys. We want to have the local government staff who did those surveys participate in that project interview. And of course, among other things, we want to have you engage in their professional development through those steps that I outlined. Turning away from the requirements, I want to talk about mentorship briefly. I'm sure if I was the person who did the sort of initial interview with you all, I touched on this a little bit. I'm sure Danielle probably did as well if she was the person. Not everyone thinks of themselves as a mentor, and certainly not every site supervisor becomes a mentor. But it's helpful for you to think about this from the outset, because even if you don't become a mentor to your fellow, you can be thinking about these concepts and ideas and thinking about how your fellow is getting mentored, even if not by you. So what makes an effective mentor? I think this lists a couple of ideas about being dependable, engaged, and authentic, looking out for the fellow, thinking about their needs, but also providing clear, critical feedback and direction when needed. A lot of site supervisors are mentors because these folks are coming into your organization, many straight out of college, and this can present certain challenges. They may have just cultural and or institutional different lenses they're seeing things from, and so helping to be the doorway and bridge into this professional space and field is incredibly valuable, and it often becomes a mentorship relationship. And we think it's important because it's going to build engagement for them. It's going to help them grow. And it's also going to help them understand the work they're doing, the value of it, the purpose, and ultimately that should lead to better results for you. A few thoughts about how to support a meaningful experience. I can't emphasize this enough. Set those check-ins, keep to those check-ins, be available for those check-ins. We ask you to do it once a week. Many of you will probably get into, if you're working right next door to somebody, see them much more often than that. But have the time to check in with them about their project, about their growth, about what they're learning and experiencing. Use it as a forum for their helping them unpack their experience and focus their attention. Appreciate them. They are working for so little. They are serving for an extended period of time. They are taking a chance on this program and with your organization. And so recognize that. Let them know what they're doing matters. Help introduce them to people in the organization who go like, oh yeah, this is great what you're doing. That can really make a difference, especially when the work can be very intense, but also not high feedback. If they're doing a long report or doing a study, it can take months to see any results. So, let them know that what they're doing matters. Think about their professional development and network and keep us informed. We can do a lot to work with you to try and respond to situations, to hopefully address things if they come up, and also just come up with ideas to support your fellow, but we don't know if you don't tell us. So the last thing I'll say is just a reminder for you all, a fellow is not an intern. They're not there to do anything the organization wants by anybody. They're not at will. They're there to serve the local government capacity building goals that are defined through the gap assessment. And we want you to support that and kind of keep that in mind. They're also not a consultant and they're not an employee. And so we want you to integrate them into your team. Yes, absolutely. We want them to feel like they're part of what's going on. We also want you to recognize that what they're doing is a little different. Along with that is this concept that service is not work. They don't get paid hourly. If they work 1 hour in a week, they get paid the same as if they work 60 hours in a week. We want you to be mindful of their schedule, but they are there to serve. They get paid a fixed living allowance, and they're there to learn, to grow. And, so if you can hold on to that concept, try to refrain from calling their activities work or calling them interns. Try to recognize they're not making any more when they work longer hours, and recognize the hardship that goes with that. So now I'll turn to our staff and a bit about what we do. Broadly speaking, our staff has a number of key roles. We uphold the core mission of the program through our management, monitoring of project partner, fellow reporting, and compliance, through communicating all of this to you, leading program-related activities, providing opportunities for both fellows, site supervisors to provide updates and share changes. We build and maintain relationships with each of you by serving as the primary point of contact for both of you, trying to connect you and the fellows with relevant resources and supporting career development interests and also project partner goals. We try and support effective communication of our program needs and activities by acting as a resource. We're there within limits to help both the partner and the fellows. Some partners think of us as just there for the fellows, but that's not the case. We actually serve both of you. We're not a dedicated mentor to the fellows, though we do spend more time with them. We're there for you as well. We also do, as needed, act as a mediator, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And we elevate human resources issues as needed to our operations director if we get to something that crosses those lines. We also lead and promote overall program activities by doing things like regional activities, regional trainings, network calls, etc. Just to give you a sense of our organizational structure, we are within the Local Government Commission. We are a program of the Local Government Commission. Within this program, I'm the overall director. I have 3 managers who manage the operational side, the network development side, and the implementation side. The implementation side is where you guys interface most directly through our regional coordinators, Savannah, Sarah, Ashoka, Kaylee, and Tim. We may be having a couple of additional support people. Each of these regional coordinators carries a portfolio of about 10 to 20 fellows a year, and they also do other things throughout the program, especially those who have a smaller portfolio. Not going to go into this, but wanted to provide it for reference just so you understand what these different divisions do. I lead program direction, budgeting, HR, personnel, Criselda works on network development, the kind of larger storytelling of the program. Ariadna supports our operations, administration, compliance pieces, the fellow placement side of things. And Mackenzie leads the implementation team, which is really the regional coordinators and the content that comes from that. The regional coordinator is your primary point of contact, the person you will most often be engaging with throughout the year. At the startup for new partners, myself or Danielle Dolan, our water program director, we lead the business development side. So I reach out to new partners, I walk through the applications, I support the startup processes. I also happen to do the candidate routing. So you're seeing a lot more of me or Mackenzie or Danielle at this time of year. But once things get rolling, it'll really be the regional coordinator and we'll all fade into the background. A regional coordinator really has three overarching roles: team coordinator for the fellows and the partners throughout the service year, and to act as a regional liaison for LGC in the program. They also act as the program compliance and reporting lead, trying to make sure that we're all staying true to those core activities. And they act as a mediator as needed between fellows and partners. Touching on each of those, I'll say the role of the team coordinator and liaison is probably the most visible role they have, and the one that would be the one you encounter most often. So they provide service support to fellows and partners, feedback and brainstorming for project implementation, guidance on the volunteer engagement project, support for transitional activities. So they're there as a resource. They coordinate professional development and service activities for the fellows, the training days, the service days, volunteer engagement. They also support larger content development for statewide events. They provide that regular engagement for a positive experience. They conduct regular check-ins. With you guys, it'll be once a month. They'll schedule a call, usually about a half an hour, maybe in the beginning longer. They'll do 3 site visits a year, and they have some structure to that. It's professional assessments and also kind of goals alignment. They're also available for feedback and support as needed, whether for fellows or partners. Typically, it's more often with the fellows, but we are there for you as well. And as I said, they're a regional liaison. They are supporting partner recruitment generally, so sometimes they're at events as a CivicSpark staff person, LGC staff person. They also represent the Local Government Commission more broadly. They're ambassadors for what we do as a larger organization. And if you ever have questions about what else does LGC do, please don't hesitate to ask your regional coordinator to connect with you about that. On the program compliance and reporting side, this is program level performance tracking, things like time cards and performance evaluations, broader compliance and staffing issue resolution. This is what, they're the frontline people who see what the fellows do most directly after you all, and so they're making sure that our documentation is completed in a timely and accurate fashion so we can be clear that fellows are staying true to their core activities, their allowable activities, that we are delivering on the project work, and that if issues arise, we're tracking it appropriately. And finally, to touch on, they can act as a mediator as needed. We want you all to know, and we want the fellows to know, that we're there to try and help make this experience work. We are not a confidant. Our regional coordinators are not HR professionals. And so our goal is initially to work with a fellow or a site supervisor if issues arise to understand and encourage them to work it out directly. Our number one strategy initially is going to be, did you talk to your site supervisor, or have you talked to the fellow? How have you tried to address this issue, or can we potentially reframe it for you? We're going to strive to serve and advocate for both of your needs to try and put this in a fair lens for all 3 parties. When necessary, if a conversation is moving past a point where it's clear that we need to hear from both sides, we're going to bring them all together. We're going to say, hey, let's sit down. Let's discuss. Let's come up with a plan of action. We're not there to solve the problems for either the fellow or the partner, but to assist in identifying and supporting a shared solution. This is exclusive of more significant issues. If there are professional issues that go beyond the day-to-day just kind of communication challenges, we have a disciplinary process. So if we need to intervene, if a fellow's not showing up for work on time or behaving inappropriately, we have a process and a plan and a set of corrective actions that we can engage in. If there's more significant issues that move into the domain of human resources, goes beyond us, right? We take it to our human resources lead, who may need to investigate as appropriate. And so that's kind of the upper boundary of that mediation. So finally, I'll touch on the fellow's role, and then we'll get to some next steps. I'm not going to say a lot about the fellows role, except for these kind of conceptual pieces, because honestly, what we talked about through implementation, that's what they're doing. So we've talked a lot about what they'll be doing and how they'll be doing it. So I just want to say broadly, our expectations of them are that they too support the program goals by serving on projects that address capacity building, and by identifying strategies to advance challenges and address the challenges. They represent their identity as an AmeriCorps fellow by wearing their uniform at all times. Super important. By identifying as an AmeriCorps fellow and clearly describing their service role to both stakeholders inside and outside. That they engage with service through professional attitude and action, being on time, ready to serve week in and week out for the full duration of their schedule. They follow their schedule. They notify you or us if there's challenges or if something interferes with their schedule. They work on a plan if they're not going to meet their goals for the year, and they just communicate generally if any issues arise. They try to be flexible and adaptable, because this is some uncertain territory. They're going into an organization they've never worked in before. They don't know the culture necessarily. And so we want them to have an open mind to potentially working in different ways, to working under different supervision, to being flexible about their schedule. They're serving from start to finish, but that might mean a week where they work 50 hours and they work 30 hours the next week and take some time off. Being proactive and making any kind of scheduling requests. And finally, they engage and advocate for personal growth alongside of us by communicating their goals while recognizing and respecting what can be accomplished through CivicSpark, identifying outside training and interests or opportunities, and embracing their role by advocating for guidance on how to prioritize when needed, on deadlines, and listening to constructive feedback and respecting organizational constraints. All of those are expectations we have for their role. The last piece I'll touch on here, and it looks like we're a little ahead of schedule, which is nice, is some next steps. So here's our program calendar. A couple dates are not firmed up yet. We start on September 3rd. It is just a little over a month away. So more to say on that in a second. We have our fellow orientation from the 3rd to the 7th in Coloma. Everybody's together. It's a retreat center. We're going to have a great time. We're going to do some really good work, and hopefully they're going to come out to you charged on September 10th. They get a longish weekend because it's also, I guess, so we want to give them an extra day the Monday, since they may be traveling, to start on a Tuesday. We're hoping gap assessments can be done by that last Friday in September. Certainly earlier. They don't need to take a month, but we're going to ask that they all get done. So we're kind of making sure they're put in the can. Our last day to enroll a full-time fellow is going to be October 2nd. So if we don't fill your spot by September 3rd, we do have that extra month before we run out of time to have somebody serve a year or 11 months and graduate before the next class starts. So that's something to keep in mind if we're still trying to place fellows for you. We don't want to do that. We want to get everybody placed before September 3rd, and we'd love to have 90 people at orientation. So we're going to work hard to see that that happens. We're going to try and get those fellow performance assessments done by November, probably even earlier. In 2020, we have our first service day in January. Our mid-year gatherings typically in February. March, we have a service day. There'll be some service day during AmeriCorps week, and late July will be graduation. The last day of service will be August 2nd, almost exactly 11 months. So we hope everything is done by then. If somebody starts late, they can extend out until September 2nd. So you can be exactly at most 1 year out. Some holidays. These are all fixed holidays for CivicSpark and for all AmeriCorps programs. We are required to offer them off to all fellows. They don't have to take them. So if you have a schedule that's a little different, for example, maybe you're working on New Year's Day, or you're open on the 26th, you can ask the fellow if they want to work that day. It's up to them whether they do or not. Often they'll want to accommodate your schedule because, frankly, if there's nobody around, what are they going to do? So, but these are the days that we have off. You'll notice 2 of them are service days, which is kind of a weird thing. Well, generally what we do is they work on that service day and then we give them a day off, ideally as like a flex day kind of thing. Some key next steps. Before the start of service, so before September 10th and even before September 3rd, we want you to ensure that your local government beneficiary information is completed that we've got those pre-service capacity assessments in, and that our service agreement is in place. We've got to have those three pieces so that we're contractually set up and the fellows will know when they start who they're serving and how. Super important. We've been, sending you emails. Please, please, please be responsive at this time. We've got about, as I said, a little over 4 weeks to go. Really want to knock those out, especially service agreements. Those can get down a rabbit hole. So please, if it's stuck on your end, I turn them around incredibly quickly. So please let us know and let's make sure those get done and are in place. It's not on here, but if you're still interviewing candidates, let's also focus attention in this next week, maybe into the week after. If you're going to try and get somebody, or if we're going to be looking at somebody who might move for this, we really want them to have accepted an offer no later than the middle of August so they have time to relocate and get settled ideally. So really put a premium on the service agreement and interviewing right now if it's not already something you've done. During the first days, you're going to do an orientation when the fellow comes on board. We have a sample agenda and checklist to get set up. You'll set up your regular supervisory check-ins. In the first weeks, you'll support that gap assessment process. You'll develop a real scope of work building on the gap assessment. You'll participate in that performance assessment process I outlined. And ideally, we're going to share this shared expectations document from the RC. And you'll have an opportunity to discuss that, and hopefully it'll work well for you. Just a little bit of an outline of what can happen during a site setup and orientation. These are questions. It's in your pre-service packet, just repeated here for your reference. Like, we want to make sure space is set up, access is set up, you've thought about the scope, you've thought about any particular benefits the fellow might need to use, you've informed people in your office, you've thought about your schedule, made sure that resources are ready to be shared. Because when the person comes on board, you want to, kind of be, oh, here you are, here's all the things, we're kind of getting ready to dive in. During your orientation, it's a good idea to review daily expectations, meet key people, review your scope, talk about site procedures, emergency access plans, all that usual stuff. Again, this is in your pre-service packet and you can refer to it, but it's a really good idea to start thinking on the setup side. Again, it's only 4 weeks out. Do you have it all set? Couple notes about invoices. This is all new for you all. Many of you may not deal with it directly, but the way we work is fellows are serving, you are paying a program fee. It is supporting my time, it is supporting our overall operating costs, it is also supporting the fellows. So it's not a consultancy, you're paying for a program fee. So our general rule with invoices is they provide a fixed amount per month. And your fellows are on the job at all times except when we engage them. So unlike a consultancy, it's not like, well, I assigned them 5 hours, I expect a bill for 5 hours. They're there and serving and will log their time to your projects with or without direction. We also will bill you, unless we have certain arrangements, for 1/11 of the cost of the whole program year each month. It's just a fixed amount each month. You will separately get a summary of project hours, but we're really trying to distinguish between the fellows' hours and the invoice because they're not directly coupled. Last notes for you, let's stay in touch. We're on Facebook, we have a story map on our website. You can join our partner network, many of you already have. If you're not already on the network, I have a listserv and a quarterly meeting that we're holding, and it's really about connecting partners to partners. Just give me a note and I'll add you to both of those. It's optional, it's not required. Keep an eye out for our monthly newsletter. We feature you all. We may send out questions to you guys to address so that we can highlight and lift up what you're doing. But it's got some great resources and news about the program and other things going on around the state. All of this orientation comes out of really 3 things, or will feed into 3 things. The pre-service packet, which we sent you when we welcomed you to the program, the service agreement you all are working on right now, the exhibits sections, and the program guide, which will come, before the start of the year. So this is useful to have, but it is also based on materials that you have or will have. And with that, I'll say thank you for your time and attention, and definitely would love to answer any questions. The first question is, some of the content is in other documents. Will you be sharing these slides? I'd also like to join the networks. Yes, I will send out the slides to all of you. I've also been recording this presentation, and we have Zoom lets you share it as a streamable online access, so you can give it to your peers if you feel like it would be useful for them. Other questions I can answer for you? I was attending for someone else. Can I get on the list? Yes, of course. The partner network, just so you know, it's not just site supervisors, and it's not even just CivicSpark partners. We've got some allies who've been interested. CivicSpark ends up sitting at the nexus of, if you were at our graduation, you would see some of the most amazing kind of sustainability, climate, energy, housing work going on around California. So you as partners are some of the leaders, and we just felt like, gosh, if we could connect you all better to each other, it would be another sort of benefit of the program. And so it's a little bit looser who gets to participate in that. It's not as focused on kind of the supervisors, et cetera. Are there examples of previous templates for gap assessments? Yes. We have a whole gap assessment guide the fellows will get. We'll be doing training on the gap assessments, and that includes a couple of examples. We've streamlined it a little bit this year, so the previous examples are not a perfect fit. Excuse me. So yes, that will be available to you. I see that you're someone who wants to be added to the listserv. I just need an email address. So if you can email me, kschoyer@lgc.org, I will add you to the partner list. Any other questions? Oh, I got someone to raise a hand. Thank you, Carol. I don't have to. Go ahead, Carol. You might be muted on your end. We can't hear you if you are talking, Carol. Oh, and Chanel also. Chanel, go ahead.
Hey, Kev, I just have a really quick question. I think this was super helpful. I am curious. So I think we definitely got the message with the CivicSpark fellow that we're not going to have them do like kind of advocacy, influencing legislation, but we do have like just our team staff meetings where we talk about a lot of these things. I'm assuming it's okay for the fellow to be a part of our staff meetings as long as they themselves are not the ones that are engaging in those activities. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It would be impossible to segregate them out from that and just, they'll get super fired up about that stuff though. So, just be like, it's awesome you got to hear that. Really cool work, but join us after you're done with your CivicSpark service.
Okay, that sounds good.
I think I had Carol, are you able to talk now? I've got you unmuted, but it looks like, was there another hand up I saw? I like it when people actually ask live questions. Will there be additional opportunities for partners to connect? Yes, so there's the partner network I mentioned, but regionally, your regional coordinator will also maybe provide venues. Like a lot of them host at the end of the year a regional gathering and poster symposium to share locally what's been going on, and they may provide opportunities for you all to do presentations to regional fellows and or in statewide webinars or connect with each other. One of the things that I've put into the partner network is a partner profile, and what it is, short survey, where you can say, this is what I'm working on, this is what I need, and this is what I have to offer. And I'm just trying to get you guys to reach out to each other so you know who's in the network. There's through the listserv, you can also post things. So hopefully all of those give you some opportunities. Got another question from Chanel.
Okay, this is the last one, and I think I may have missed this part when you were kind of going over like the HR piece. But I did hear you say kind of we encourage you to work it out with a fellow. And so I think kind of here at Climate Plan, we have that same culture of really wanting to talk with them, work things out. I don't anticipate this happening, but because it recently happened on our end, I'm just curious if there's a point where we're noticing things, you know, like let's say like things kind of like regularly over time aren't coming in, you know, on time, or the quality isn't super great. I would say like on our end, we would kind of like, you know, have some conversations around like trial periods of assessing performance, those type of things. Since, you know, we're not the employer, but if we wanted to do something like that, that would go through, I'm assuming, the site supervisor. Is that right?
Yeah, the regional coordinator is, I think, what you mean. So
right, the regional coordinator.
We're the
right.
site supervisor, we're the regional coordinator. So yes and no. You're kind of on the right track conceptually, for sure. If somebody's not meeting performance expectations, let us know when it's, you know, just happening along the way, because honestly, sometimes it becomes he said, she said, if there's no, like, you don't forward an email or two, and we just end up like, how do we know? So it's good to just loop the regional coordinator in if stuff is happening. If it's persistent, we have a structured process where we have kind of a plan of action, written warning, verbal warning kind of thing. We want to be part of that. You might, before it gets there, have your own kind of expectation setting and kind of intervention. And we might just talk to you like, you know, I don't want to wait till it's super serious for us to come in with our process. We've done that in the past, and it sometimes gets too big, and we'd rather start earlier. But we also don't want to overstep and come into a process which is frankly a professional learning process for the fellow. Like if you're kind of saying, hey, this deliverable was late or didn't meet expectations, I don't want to have our staff have to be part of that until it becomes a bit slightly bigger problem, but not too big a problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's kind of almost like this, like you were saying, this balance where we're kind of like, like I said, again, a professional learning, like how do we kind of create the structure for you and keeping you guys up to date and informed. And if by chance it starts to be persistent, and I think the process that we have isn't handling it, we can kind of gradually rope you guys in, it sounds like, to do that other process.
Yeah, and the thing we've seen in the past, honestly, is our site supervisors are such great citizens. They kind of are like, well, we just wanted to deal with it. We didn't want to bother you. And then when it was too much, they were like, oh, now can you come in? And we're like, well, could we have stepped in a little earlier? So I don't know where that perfect line is. I don't want you to feel like you have to route everything through us, and I don't want you to feel like we're having to be part of every detail, but I also don't want to leave you hanging.
Okay, yeah. I think we'll kind of figure it out too, but that's just kind of helpful guidance.
Wonderful. Yeah, appreciate the question. Any other questions? Give it about another minute if folks have something they're ruminating on. You can always follow up with us afterwards. Want to make sure that others might have the same question. So if you've got a question, feel free to ask it. Not seeing anything more and wanting to be the guy who let you go 10 minutes early, which makes me happy for you all, I am going to end this orientation for you all. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your attention. I hope it was helpful. I hope it was useful. I will be sharing the information afterwards. And I do want you to know how much we are honored by the opportunity to work with you and support your communities and the issues that you're facing. And we look forward to an amazing year with you. Thank you so much, everybody.